Hi everyone, welcome. Thank you for joining in early. I will be starting shortly. So in the meantime, I hope semua orang dah dinner, semua all relaxed and excited for today's session. So it's going to be a very casual one. Feel free to on your videos if you would like. We would like it to be very interactive and engaging, but it's up to you. And if you have any questions, you can post it via the chat function, or you can even raise your hand and we will assist accordingly. So we'll be starting in a few minutes. Jadi dalam about 3 minit lagi ke? Right? Stay tuned.
Yes, Jalil is already in the house.
Hello, hi.
Hi, Jalil.
Hi, welcome.
Hi, Afina.
Yeah, I think we'll give a few more minutes for a few more participants to come in. As of now, we have about 28 people, and I'm sure that there'll be more joining. We have full registration actually. So I'm sure probably they want to perform their prayers first or have a dinner.
Hello.
How are you doing?
Good. It's kind of.
Awesome. I'm just back actually from from a match. So we had a league match just now.
Oh, SWAT, is it?
Yeah.
Okay. Is it every week or?
Well, our league has been postponed for the whole year of MCO.
Yeah.
So we have 3 games remaining, but yes, it's every week, every weekend.
Okay.
Most amateur leagues are on every weekend. So because amateurs, most of them are just part-time players or players for fun. They have their day jobs and all. But what's the story with Liverpool?
Yeah, it's not looking good. Yeah. Horrible patch of form. Worrying. First I thought, okay, I'm not going to win the league. 4th place will be okay, but now even that's looking in doubt.
But I'm surprised. 5 defeats at home, eh?
Yeah, from being undefeated for like 4 years. So.
Hi everyone, do you mind kindly muting your mics? Right, thanks.
Awesome. From 28 now we are at 38. So I guess I'll leave the queue to Afrina. She'll be running the show together with you, Jalil, tonight. Whenever you guys are ready, I guess we can start.
All right, sure. Okay, about 30 seconds. Sama, All right, Assalamualaikum and welcome everyone to Climbing the Ladder in Fancy Socks with Jalil Rashid. Right, so first and foremost, I would like to introduce myself. My name is Afrina Zulkifli and I'll be your moderator for today. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us today. It's a Saturday night, 8:30, right? So thank you for making the time to be here. And of course, we have a very special guest speaker. Everyone knows him. Jalil is such a prominent leader in the industry. Okay, all right. So Climbing the Ladder in Fancy Socks is actually an initiative by FC SWAT or Soccer with Attitude. So that is what SWAT stands for. So this is one of the initiatives under the Ask the Leader series. So this initiative is not to just nurture, to motivate, but of course to empower the youth. And we are proud to welcome to the floor Izzat, who is the president and the founder of SWAT Malaysia. Okay, Izzat, the floor is yours.
Hi everyone, hi friends and family. I think I've shared with you early on this message. I'm not going to introduce myself so much because tonight is not about me. Tonight is about Jalil together with all of you. I promised Jalil and Afrina yesterday I'm not going to speak too long, but basically why I'm doing this is because I think where I am now, I think I can say that I'm comfortable. I think I can say that I'm able, to have this initiative, this project, because I can have my day job. I can run my day job. I can arrange it, organize it. So it requires skills. But behind the skills are a set of principles that I have in my life. And this set of principles were shared to me, were taught to me. I was groomed by a set of leaders, mentors, and also friends, actually. And I think I was lucky because I ada environment macam tu. And not everyone has that platform, not everyone has the environment. And one day I wake up, I said to myself, what if all of these people get the same access to knowledge, experience, wisdom, principles of these proven leaders? And Jalil is one of them. And that's why I brought to you guys this program. And thank you to Afrina, Shaza, there's also Indra, Hazim. These are the volunteers. After we did the first program, they all volunteered to help. We asked for nothing much in return, just asked to support our page, Instagram page, so that we are able to pitch to sponsors, and then the sponsors' money will be used for us to initiate this kind of program, bring more credible speakers, and we wanted to make it very personal and up close. Because if you want to talk about those big topics, economic outlook, what's happening about politics in Malaysia, we have Clubhouse, we have all these platforms going, all those conferences going. But I think in this age, especially at this moment, during this pandemic MCO, some of us lost our job. Some of us actually lost a lot of things. Particularly my wife just lost her mother during MCO. So, en route to recovery, for us to recover and even be better, of course, we need to know how, the skills, but most importantly, the set of principles and values that you have to carry in your life. And that's, Captain America used to ask Tony Stark, and he said, take off that suit. What are you? And he said, I'm a billionaire philanthropist and, a scientist. So the question that we should ask ourselves, take off all our jobs, take off everything, families and all. So what kind of person are we? So that's the big question that we have to ask. And I think Jalil is the perfect speaker for this series because being actually, I would say, being a youth himself, I still see him as a youth leader. I think it's interesting to learn his point of view, the principles, the lessons learned, what works, what doesn't work, and how can we take charge, the youth today take charge. When people say the youth are not ready to vote, so we can't just be banging on the door saying we are ready. So how do we actually show, how do we make the changes? How do we change status quo? How do we make people see that the world is changing, but to change the world, we also have to change ourselves. So that's all. I hope you all take this opportunity to engage with Jalil, have a fun, casual session, and do know that this session is recorded as well. So be mindful of what you're going to share. But again, take this opportunity as much as you can. I know we don't have enough time to speak with Jalil, just 2 hours, and I'm already buying 5 minutes. But anyway, have fun. Yeah, that's all my message. Thank you so much, everyone, and thank you for support. Again, do follow our page and all the best. Thank you so much, Jalil, for doing this, for meeting all of us, for taking your Saturday night. Afrina, over to you.
All right, thanks, Izzat. As you can see, even our president is very passionate about this. So do follow us on Instagram, on Facebook, and even on Twitter to keep updated on future talks, future initiatives that will be conducted by FC SWAT. All right. So without further ado, let's not waste any more time. Let's welcome our special guest speaker, Jalil Rashid. Okay. A bit of background about him. He is the former president and group CEO of Pemodalan Nasional Berhad, or we know as PNB. He has had leadership roles in Singapore, US, UK, Malaysia, Indonesia with Invesco and Aberdeen Standard Investments. He is a founding member of Invesco's corporate governance and ESG practices. Over 17 years in experience in numerous industries, and he is currently a senior advisor for a global consulting firm, a private equity firm, and a family office based in the US. And he is one of the youngest and most prominent leaders in the corporate world today. So without further ado, let's welcome to the stage Jalil Rashid.
Thank you. Thanks, Afrina. Thanks for the very flattering introduction. Glad to be here, and I hope you all go away 2 hours later with a lot of useful words. I guess, yeah, that's the aim. You.
All right, Jalil. If you don't mind,
Yeah.
Can you give a short walkthrough of your personal and career life, the defining moments of your upbringing, just to get the ball rolling today?
Yeah, sure. So sorry, lost transmission just now. Yeah, so I got into fund management by accident. As everybody knows, I had no idea what I wanted to do when I finished studies. I was a pretty impatient person and still am. So I just wanted to study something that was as broad as possible and then just start working and earning money. So then I stumbled upon fund management. I thought it was quite interesting. It allowed me to enter various, analyze different companies, travel the world. So I applied for a job, not knowing what it was. Got in as a graduate trainee, had a wonderful career. Over the span of 17 years. It took me to various countries. I was involved in various international projects. I worked on some M&A deals at a very early age. I remember my first M&A deal was when I was 25 years old. We worked on acquiring a Swiss company back in London. And then I moved back to Malaysia to run the investment team, and then subsequently became CEO at 27 of the Sharia arm. And then at about 30 years old, I moved over to Singapore to run a regional investment firm, Invesco. And then I moved back to Malaysia. So I guess for me, I've been quite fortunate. I think timing and luck is something that people don't talk about, but it was absolutely crucial. Joined the right firm at the right time, moved on at the right time, I guess, when I look back. And it has helped me find what I am. So my upbringing, I am the youngest of three. So I've got an elder sister and an elder brother, who are both now back in Malaysia. My father was a civil servant. My mother is a housewife. So yeah, we ended up. I was born in Raub Pahang, and that's how I am a Raub-born person. I don't have any family there, but our life was moving every 3 years to different places. And then we had a stint in Hong Kong for a while when my father was posted to the Malaysian embassy there. And then we came back to KL. So I guess growing up, we grew up in a middle income family, not wealthy, but also quite also comfortable in a way. We had all the basic things we needed to do. And I guess growing up also, looking at how the parents save money to put the kids through education, also showed you a lot of hard work. That there was no shortcuts to doing things. We were not from I guess well-connected family, so we just had to do it the old-fashioned way, the hard way. So I think those were the qualities that were imparted on, and those are the qualities I hope to impart my kids on as well. So that's I guess a brief introduction into upbringing and how I got into fund management. I can go on talking about this for 2-3 hours, but I'll probably wait for the Q&A so that it's a lot more pointed and interesting.
Yeah, you've achieved so much, especially in your late 20s. What would you say would be one of your proudest moments, throughout your career up till now?
Yeah, so I never thought about that until about a few years ago. Someone asked me, and it was an exercise that forced me to kind of look back. I think there were a few moments. Obviously, being asked to become CEO at 27 was a huge privilege, huge honor. And I told at that point when my boss told me that we would want you to become the CEO, my first instinct was say yes, thank you very much. But then deep inside my head, I had this lingering doubts, can I do it? And I actually did go back to my boss and say, thank you very much for this, but I have doubts. And he says, don't worry, just don't screw it up, which was not a very ringing endorsement. But you learn along the way. And I think one lesson that I learned from there was that if you're given a great opportunity, just take it, learn along the way. You are never going to be 100% ready for anything. So that was one. I guess there was a lot of milestones in Singapore. I took over a business which had about $1 billion of assets under management. But when I left, we had about $12 billion. So the business grew very exponentially over a period of 7 years. But I think without doubt, the most proudest moment was obviously being PNB CEO, right? It's such an institution in Malaysia, and being CEO, I guess at 37 was a huge privilege and an honor. And also, I guess, somebody out of the system as well, because as you know, Malaysia just likes to move CEOs around to various organizations. So the fact that I was kind of plucked out from outside to come in was a huge honor for me. Yeah, I think it will undoubtedly remain a very proud moment for me, even 10, 20 years from now.
All right, thanks, Jalil. That's very inspiring, especially today. All participants, well, majority of participants are, from the youth, and it's your story is indeed very inspiring. Okay, so today we have a few segments to talk about. We have the first would be on leadership and career and development, personal development, and also personal branding and comms. So let's take a dive into leadership first, right? So talking about leadership, especially in the early years of your career, how do you take charge of things? Especially being young, being new. How do you be above the rest? People will see you, and in terms of visibility, especially.
Yeah, I think I think the biggest challenge is that if you are a young person coming through the ranks in the corporate world, and then eventually becoming CEO, you would have to deal with the first dealing with different age groups within the company, right? So when I became CEO, at that point, granted, the company wasn't too big, but I still had staff who were almost twice my age. And then when I moved to Singapore, I had staff who were as old as my dad, as my parents. But I think where it's important to have clarity of thought when you go into these kind of roles, to know what exactly you are good at as a CEO, as a leader, and what you need to achieve. I think the mistake is that a lot of people go in thinking that role comes with a lot of power to do anything and everything that you want. And I think that's where the biggest problem comes in. I think you need to know first, what are you good at, and focus on that. Secondly, know how to delegate. Third, know how to inspire through leadership, not what they say, leadership by example, not leadership by fear. And also, I think be able to motivate the staff, right? I think the biggest quality of a leader is to come into a company, be able to articulate strategy, and then make sure that everyone in the company follows that, can buy into that strategy and follow your vision, and understands your vision. They know exactly what is their role in the entire journey. So that for me is the biggest role of the CEO. Somewhat like a chief cheerleading officer, to kind of motivate and inspire. Secondly, is to have a very strategic, focused mindset. I think in early on, when I took on the CEO role, this was about 10, 12 years ago. In my mind, I wanted to do 100 things, but I think realistically, I could perhaps only do maybe about 10. But then when you realize, when you sit down and list down all the 100 things you want to do, and then you see what is going to change the company in a very positive way, it's not 100, it's probably only 10. The other 90 are what I would say nice to have, not must have. So that's where I learned things very quickly, that sometimes, doing not too much can move the needle more than trying to do everything and getting nothing done. Those were the sort of, I guess, constant communication that I always told the staff. I always came in and told the staff that, I don't know everything. That's why I'm leaning on you to help me. And that's how I got support and buy-in from various segments of the people. There's never one size fits all, because I think you go into companies at different stages of development. Some companies are a lot more mature, some companies are still developing, and it requires different set of leadership abilities.
All right. Especially, joining, being young and a young CEO, it's undeniable that we have, society has this stigma towards the youth. We are lazy, or we are immature, we lack experience and whatnot. How do we as youth overcome, sometimes we do have substance, we have the idea, we have substance, we know how to get the idea across, but how do we overcome this stigma? Because it's just a stigma that's very common, especially with the elderly generations and people across generations.
I think that is slowly changing. Obviously, over the last few years, that's slowly changing. If you look at what is really defining a lot of change in the world today is technology, and most of these firms are founded by young people. And they have really completely changed the way we communicate, the way we behave. Can you imagine going through MCO without technology, right? No one can work from home and everything. We wouldn't be having this conversation. But everything has been driven by technology. And if you take a step behind and see who are the, I guess, people who have been behind this, are mainly young people. Right. So I think there is huge recognition that they are changing the face of the world. But there is always that question that, yes, they are changing the world in the world of business, but in terms of decision making and politics, it's still dominated by I guess the older generation. And this is something that I think collectively everyone needs to kind of speak up and voice. And it will be a slow change. I think we're seeing that change already in business. I think, but we need to see more of that change from a institutionalized approach, I would say. I think there's some things that are ingrained. I think, there's still companies that equate ability to number of years you have worked, and there are pros and cons about that, right? Of course, experience and wisdom can never be replaced. But I think that there is ability and talent that can be tapped, that may not necessarily be 30, 40 years of working experience, right? And there's no right answer for this, unfortunately. I just think that it requires a lot of education. It requires a lot of drive and willingness from the key stakeholders, I think. So if you look at Malaysia, I think it requires a huge commitment from the government. and also all the GLCs, GLICs, who control a lot of companies, to start putting younger people in charge, right? The privilege that I got to run PNB, and I thought that would be the start, the baptism of fire to kind of have more younger people in place, and I would love to see a lot more people get that opportunity.
Right. Going back to what you mentioned earlier, you were talking about, learning from people, regardless of the age, younger or those who are more experienced. So what is your take on, mentorship, especially for the youth, for us to emulate, to learn from, especially those with vast experience? How do we approach this? Sometimes being young, sometimes we are afraid. Macam mana, like how do I approach without, seeming that, I lack a certain set of knowledge or skills? So, what's the best way to approach this?
Yeah, I think you can't be shy or malu about this, right? I think if you are going to be in that category, then you're not going to move up the ladder. There is a certain quality about people who have moved up the ladder. They have been fearless, they have a bit of the tak maluness in them, and they admit when they don't know because they want to learn, right? I was quite lucky when I joined my first firm. I was assigned a mentor. So all our graduate trainees who joined the firm was always given a mentor. And that mentor would be the person who would kind of give them advice on their work, quality of work, everything from the financial models that we built, right, to what kind of questions we were asking CEOs. And I remember, my first few investment meetings, and after I came out of the meeting and I thought I did very, very well. And I asked my mentor, how do you do it? He said, well, you could have always done better. So, he would always be there kind of guiding me, maybe you should ask this next time, approach it from this angle. They also were there to kind of guide us through, I guess, the personal career development kind of thing, right? So I benefited hugely from having that. Absolutely privileged to have that. When I joined Invesco, we introduced that as well, because I felt that I was a big beneficiary of that, and I wanted a lot of people to do that as well. But I think there's two ways to look at this, right? One is joining a firm that values graduate management trainees and all that sort of thing, and assigns you a mentor. Then there are a lot of places, maybe 90% of places, who don't. But the initiative should be on you to go out there, talk to your colleagues. I say internal networking is very important. You need to go and understand what your colleagues are doing in other departments, right? Show an interest, show keenness, ask them what they're doing in their work, why. Always be curious, ask questions, and that's how I did. I was annoyingly curious about a lot of things, and I sat with different people. I made friends with different people in the firm. So as a result, you don't need to kind of assign yourself to one mentor. I think you can have multiple mentors, multiple people teaching you, because that combination of knowledge is what's going to make it very, very powerful. So I would say take the initiative. If you're curious about things, ask questions, ask people in other departments. Don't confine yourself to just your division. Understand how the company works, why certain decisions were made, and everything. If the senior leadership is not going to take the initiative to do so, you should do it in your own little way. That would be my advice.
Yeah, that's very true. Especially to stand out when you're young, you just join your company and whatnot. It's for us to take the initiative, not to be shy, to ask questions, and always try our best to stand out in a way. And then you were talking about networking, which we will touch a bit later when we talk about personal branding and comms. But before that, we have a question from one of the attendees. The question is, okay, GLCs in Malaysia, especially of late, has always been inundated with problems stemming from what seems to be bad governance and accountability. How has your experience been, and how do you think we can overcome this major setback?
Yeah, so I don't disagree. There are a lot of problems, and I think there are a few problems, right? And, I was actually writing about this morning, so quite apt. First is people, right? Every single problems we have seen in GLCs over the years until today, if you sit down and analyze each problem, it will go back to wrong people. It will go back to poor decision or poor management. But when you look at poor management and you look at it and you say, how could this have been avoided? It could have been avoided if somebody said, this is the wrong thing. This is the wrong thing and we should not do this, right? And say, I'm not doing it. If we have people doing that over the last 10, 20 years, I think we would be in a very, very good spot. But I think for me, if there's one reason to bring it, is people. The second part is the state or the government has too much ownership of businesses in Malaysia. I was against that. I think there is a role for developing countries for the state to be in and not be in. If, for example, we need the state to come and grow a particular industry that could be potentially big, fine, no problem. But must the state own 100%? And must it continue owning 100% for the next 20 years? No. I was very clear that at PNB in 10 years, the vision or how PNB should look like is that they should cease to be major shareholders of all the companies. Because by doing that, you also de-risk yourself politically. You make sure that the burden of shareholding is shared across a wider number of shareholders, right? No one can come and say, you are 60% owner, you must do this, right? But when that shareholding is spread across, there's better accountability, better structure, better governance, and also drive and pressure from different people to kind of challenge the company into making better. Drive is a very important thing, right? Because when you're in a environment where there is no accountability and no one questions you, the tendency is just to keep on going and doing things, right? So a few things, right? One is people, another one is the level of state involvement in business. And third is, I guess, how we are structured from a GLC perspective that leads to maybe not so much of accountability along the way. So It's a structural problem, and unfortunately cannot be solved overnight. Requires huge amount of will, dedication, and a lot of unpopular decisions.
Yeah, so very true, Jalil. All right, okay, taking a shift, we have a lot of participants who are females today. So I'm very sure that they're very keen to know about, women leadership. Especially now we see a lot of women, being board members and whatnot, more opportunities for them. Women are breaking the glass ceiling and whatnot. So what's your thoughts in regards to women leadership?
Right, I lost you for about like 10 seconds. Would you just repeat that again?
All right. So, today we see a lot of women, taking bigger roles in boards and whatnot. So what's your thoughts in regards to women leadership?
We look at the world and there's something called very popular now in the Western world, we call D&I, right? Diversity and inclusion. In fact, they have dedicated officers to do this. My previous firm had one as well. But the first thing with diversity comes gender diversity, right? You need to balance that out, and not just having 30% or 50% of women on the board or on the management, but also paying them equally, right? Treating them as equals, right? Not looking at it as male and female. I'm all for it. I got asked a few weeks ago at a forum where how I felt about quotas, and I know this is a very touchy topic, but I think quotas are absolutely necessary as a first step to get the participation rate up, right? And then once that becomes the norm, then you can take away that quota. Then there's already that I guess natural pressure on you to kind of have more females. In my experience at PNB, when some of the subsidiary companies directors were about to retire, and the nomination committee would actually present some names, they would automatically say, we need more females. We need more females. We need this kind of people. So I think there is sufficient pressure, and I think thanks to everybody out there and a lot of groups and NGOs and everything who keep on pushing this, there is realization that there must be that sort of diversity, right? But again, it shouldn't. People should be doing it because it's the right thing to do. not do it because it's a quota. So I think we've reached that stage now. We're past that kind of quota thinking that people kind of now understand that it is something we should be doing. So it'll take a while, but I think Malaysia is probably, and it's one of the, I guess, more positive part is that I think when you look at how Malaysia fares amongst all the developing countries, I think we're doing quite well in that. Not necessarily very well. There's always room to improve, but definitely if we look at public sector and private sector, we do have a lot of ladies in decision-making positions.
Yeah, it's true. It's evident that we've made, tremendous strides, especially in the, past few decades as well. So we hope to overcome this, issue, especially as we progress forward, right? So let's take a shift to the next segment on career and employment. Okay. We received a few questions actually before the event itself. During registration, the participants, a lot of them asked about, the stagnation of the wage that we have today. Bank Negara states that, an employee should, for a comfortable lifestyle, 2,700 a month. EPF says if you own a car, 2,490, right? But regardless of an inflation rate of at least 2% a year, our minimum wage is 1,200, right? And even a majority of those who are in their 20s, the young professionals are earning like 2,000 to 2.5. How do we overcome this? It's a systemic issue. It's decades long of worth of policies. So what's your take on this?
Yeah, unfortunately, this is a failure of policies, right? I think in the 90s, as we progress, the industrialization era, we grew the economy at the expense of looking at wage increase in a sustainable way, right? In the 1990s, we always would go overseas, attract FDI and say, come and set up your factory in Malaysia where wages are very cheap. And we did at that point have quite a decent amount of locals working in factories. Today it's reversed, it's almost entirely foreigners. But the wages never moved from back then to now. And also there are some graduates who joined the workforce in like mid-90s, and I still know some companies who still pay the same amount of 1,008 to 2,000 ringgit. So it's a systemic failure on our part that we have not looked at this for nearly two and a half decades, right? You had wages in 1990 going like this and staying in a straight line for about 30 years. And now suddenly we said, we got a wage problem, it should be here. So that big leap from say 1,008 to say paying somebody 3,000 is a huge leap, right? And a lot of companies over the years have been built on an infra that has supported you to be paying below 2,000. So few things. One is, again, unpopularization, right? The government needs to come up with very, very strict minimum wage, right? Increasing minimum wage 50 ringgit a year, not good enough. They have to be very clear and focused and say, okay, it's not going to happen overnight. This is going to be 10 years. But every year we want wage to increase by this amount, right? Incentivize companies if you have to through tax breaks, in the initial years and everything. Incentivize people for automating their businesses. Give them grants, right? The other reason is also that foreign workers are so cheap in Malaysia. So there's no incentivization. If I did the cost analysis, I said, okay, I'll hire 1,000 Indonesian workers. It's much cheaper than buying machines, right? Because the thinking is, I will forever pay the same guy the same wages for the next 10 years. And it's very flawed thinking. So unfortunately, we cannot get minimum wage issues to go up unless the government doesn't intervene. So the government must intervene, set that, and force everyone to move up. And it must be progressively done on an annual basis. So yes, employers play a huge part in this, and then the government plays a huge part in this, right? Interestingly, wage was one of the first things I changed when I was at PNB. Within the first 2 months, we did a wage review for the entire firm, and everyone from the bottom level right up to senior. Of course, seniors didn't get too much of an increase. They were pretty decently paid. But we moved up everybody's salary. So the minimum wage was 3,000. For the non-clerical, security driver and everything. That was not inclusive of all their other benefits that they received. But and did it cost us? Yes, it did. But I think in the longer term, it's something that is quite small in the grand scheme of things.
All right, sure. All right. Do you think that this is very much also attributed to, the number of SMEs that we have? It makes up about 90 to 95% of our economy.
Yeah.
So, perhaps that's why, the government, we did increase by, by just a bit, by, 100 or so. So, how do you see like all these SMEs, affecting our minimum wage? Yeah.
Yeah. So why I say it needs to be quite done delicately and done slowly. But, essentially we've missed out practically 20 years, an opportunity to do this over 20 years. And now we have to do it quite quickly, right? So if we had done it progressively, it could have been less painful. But, we've kind of neglected that and now doing it a bit later. So certain assistance need to be given, right? We need to kind of think about, okay, you increase wages, I will give you a bit of a reduction in tax rate. So, your cost outlay isn't too high. If you're thinking of automating your business, there are grants we can give you, and everything. So there needs to be certain things that need to be done, reskilling people or doing that. Which is why I said the government plays a huge role in this, not just from setting the policies, but also ensuring that these companies are given the right sort of assistance in order to do so. Because if we fall into that trap and say that 90% of Malaysia's economy is driven by SMEs, which is true, and we say we cannot afford to do it, we'll be in a much more dangerous situation 10 years down the line, right? So we've kind of let go 20 years, let's not let go the next 10, is what I'm saying. It's not good. Like I said, structural issues are the worst decisions governments have to make because it's unpopular, not going to win you votes. It will upset a lot of people, especially the lobby groups who are quite powerful, and fund elections. But it's something that is necessary and needs to be done. Yeah. There's been a lot of people saying, the gig economy will be the next big thing. Yes, it will be a big thing, but I think you should not rely on that completely. I think the gig economy is there for people who choose that route to be flexible, and not every job can be done through the gig economy. There needs to be, I guess, certainty of income for a good large number of people. So you should not let the argument of a gig economy derail you from setting wage policies.
All right, thanks, Jalil. Yeah, it's very evident that our decade-long full of policies needs to be reformed, but it takes also a very it's very sensitive. It's very fragile. So the government has to find the best approach to tackle all of this. Okay, let's take a few questions from the floor. Okay, we have a few here. All right, okay, so this is a question from Hilmi. Okay, my environment of work requires me to think fast and respond smartly as I'm dealing with seniors with various backgrounds from different countries. How to keep the positive momentum and having a good decision making whenever dealing with them. So I think it goes back to what you were saying earlier.
Yeah, I think knowing your colleagues and people around you is extremely very important. And I think having an articulation of decisions is very important, right? I always told my colleagues that if you come with a decision, don't just say A or B, come up with the articulation about why A over B over C, right? What were the steps you thought about that could go wrong with A, B? So think about it from that point of view, risk mitigation. If I did A, this could go wrong. And I think when you articulate that in a concise, clear manner, people do appreciate that. At PNB, one thing I did was I shortened meetings, because we were notorious for having long meetings. So I made a rule that all meetings should end in 45 minutes. Casual meetings should finish in less than 30 minutes. My mantra was, we meet more regularly, but we meet shorter, so everyone is informed. Only the most relevant people who are in decision making, who should be there, were in the room. And every agenda for the meeting had a conclusion or how it should be measured. I didn't like those things that were hanging, that couldn't be measured. Like if people came and asked, budget of 5 million, what is the measure of success? How do we know this 5 was spent properly in order for us to improve the next 5, right? Having that sort of clarity of thought was very important. And it's something that I encourage everybody to do when you are in a position that you should put through decisions and get the kind of right recognition from your colleagues. I think that would be well appreciated.
Right. It's interesting that you say, you shorten the meetings up to 30 and 40 minutes. I myself, I work at a GLC, days are filled with meetings, and you start work at 5 or 6, every day.
Yeah.
And then especially when you're working from home, you can't run away from it, when your boss or your supervisor texts you, and then you can't go anywhere, you're there. So they expect you to even work longer hours, all of that. So what's your take on that, especially working from home? Some people prefer it. Like at first, like for myself as well, earlier on, it was, I find it easier, there wasn't commuting, so I save a lot of energy on that. But then I spend so many more hours because there's no longer office hours,
I think, when this whole pandemic happened, people say, oh, that's the death of office, no one's going to go to office. I disagree. I think like how human beings have a home, your house, an office, a company needs a house, needs a home, and that's the office, right? But I share the sentiment that, if you work in a firm that has 500 people, does your future office need to have 500 desks? No, maybe not, right? There'll be a combination of hot desking and permanent desks and that sort of thing. But I think this thing about working from home is something that I feel that should be left to the individual to decide rather than the company. And I think it's time that companies start treating people like adults and let them make the decision, right? I was very used to working from home back in Singapore, days that I didn't have any external meetings and I didn't need to go in, I would just work from home, and I would go back early if I need to fetch my kids from school or anything. And when I came to PNB, I did the same thing, right? People didn't work on weekends. I never encouraged people to work beyond 5. I had shorter meetings. It was really up to them to manage their time, right? I took away punch cards from PNB. So you didn't need to tap in your access ID and get traced for coming in before 8:30 or leaving before 5. I said, you can come in anytime you want. You can leave anytime you want, right? If you live far away, you want to go back home at 3:30 to avoid the jam and continue your work from home, I'm fine with that as long as you finish. So it was about giving people deliverables at the end of the day. One of the many questions we got during the first MCO was, how do you strike the balance between working, the lack of separation between home and office? Again, can't answer that question. It really depends on how people do it, right? Some people are very good at getting into the zone. Some people are not. And I guess MCO has made it also a lot more difficult because your kids are at home, so you're kind of juggling multiple roles. I think my feel is that's an option that should be given to the employees to exercise, and companies shouldn't say you must work from home or you must work from office, right? I think there should be flexibility in work arrangements, and it's up to the staff to find the right mix. But I still think it is absolutely important to still go into office, to have airtime and rapport with your colleagues and everything, right? Because if you just work from home all the time and people don't know you exist, people won't know you exist, right? It's difficult. And I think this pandemic working from home is okay for certain people at a certain level of seniority, but I think it's also tough for very young people. And I say this because I think these young people look for guidance coming into the office, speaking to people around them, to show them, am I doing this right and everything. And that lack of guidance, I would suspect it can be quite difficult for the young people. So I think that these are the people that would probably go in and work from home as and when they need. So I think that should be the environment moving forward.
Yeah, thanks, Jalil. Yeah, it's very true. It's apparent actually because we can see especially the new hires, the new recruits, for the onboarding and whatnot. They don't even know the people they're working with. They haven't met these people face to face, and we can see this. The challenges that they're facing. They don't know who to address, how to adapt. And then of course we see a lot of those just like struggling to manage everything, especially those with families and whatnot, right? What's your take in regards of we have a question here on the major difference, okay, on working culture from when you were in Singapore and when you're here in Malaysia, because you work in both countries. The difference in culture. I was in one of your clubhouse, you were talking about the difference in culture and all that. So perhaps you can reiterate it here as well.
Yeah. So culture was quite different, right? It was very, very different. I came from a very global environment where we had different nationalities. Work was super intense. And there was an amazing, unbelievable amount of hustle on you to do things, because no matter how successful I was in my job, could I get fired tomorrow? Yes, I can. Yes, I can, right? And that's how global firms work, right? If they feel that, things are not working right, we need to downsize, we need to cut costs. So there was always that hustle, there was always that drive and hunger to kind of just keep on doing better and better and better, right? But also flexibility. You could choose how you want to work, how long you want to work, and everything. And coming back to when I first joined PNB, it was a very institutionalized culture where things were very fixed. It was a very top-down management model. So CEO says everything jalan, no one questions, right? And I had to change that. I came from an environment again where I could question my bosses, right? And I wanted people to question. So in the first month meetings, everyone was silent. And if I ask a question, inevitably people get very scared and just not in agreement. And I had to kind of push them back and say, no, I'm not asking for agreement. I'm asking for ideas. Do you agree? Could we do things better? So we needed to break that, right? And also the somewhat of the VIP culture, somewhat, right? So one thing I did was I deactivated the executive lift on the first day. I said I don't need an lift just for myself. But it was a very prevalent thing in Malaysia where I think bosses had their own lift, they masuk and keluar, separately and everything. But I wanted the interaction with the staff. And when I deactivated the lift, and I was waiting for the lift in the morning, no one will come into the lift with me. Semua takut, they won't come into the lift with me. I had to ask them to come in. I would do small chit chat with them, ask them where they're from, which division they work and everything. I had to do a lot of mini town halls. I did one large town hall for everybody, but I did smaller, more casual town halls over like coffee or teh tarik, especially with the clerical staff, non-executive, just to ease them, because they were, I consider everybody as ambassadors of the firm. When you work with PNB, inevitably someone will ask you, oh, ASB bagus tak tahun ni, right? It's first thing. People always ask you that, no matter what you do, whether you're a driver at PNB or you're the chief investment officer, everyone's going to ask you a question. So for me, we need to arm the staff with all the information because they are our greatest ambassadors, right? So that's where the openness in communication came in. We started really interacting a lot internally about what we're doing. Before the Amanah Saham was announced, we actually told the staff a few hours before the announcement, and we sent them an FAQ. Say that, okay, if people ask, this should be your answer, right? This is why we announced this amount. This is how we got the amount and everything. And when I got emails from staff, I was quite surprised. I got a lot of emails saying that was the first time someone has actually shared how the whole thought process of the decision making of the dividends came in. But they also did a huge amount of work, passing on this message to a lot of people. So They were somewhat our ambassadors, right? If each of them can go and tell 10, 20 people, it spreads the message in a much more positive way. So I think that's where I think the culture was, great bunch of people, nice, motivated by the right intention, not necessarily in the right organizational structure to kind of facilitate that. There was too many layers to go abroad. It was very hierarchical. There were 18 levels under me. And each level you have to work for at least 2 years before you get promoted. So that means kalau 18 levels, it'll take you 36 years to make it to one level below CEO. I was 37 years old when I took the job. So in a way, something's not right with the system. So we flattened the org chart to 7 levels and widened the wage structure within each gap. And I also took away titles from name cards because people are obsessed about titles, right? Because every time the title changes, they get a monetary uplift, they get more money. So I wanted people to be less obsessed with the titles and more obsessed with their own personal performance. And we attach individual KPIs to people. So we were telling them, okay, if you're a fund manager and you're managing this particular fund, your target is to hit X amount. If you hit X amount, I will give you this amount of money for bonus. Very clear. That is what you should be doing. Forget about your title. So we took out title. I was very egalitarian, very Nordic about that. And of course some didn't like it, but we did it anyway. And then in the new office that we were going to move into 118, I took out all the offices. No one had a room. Everyone was sitting outside. Of course, if you're a boss, you would get a desk a bit more in a quieter corner, but everyone was open, including me. So that was an absolutely radical change for a lot of people. But yeah, I had planned to have a sliding door that can be closed if I want the privacy, but then otherwise I'll be out in the open. So there was a lot of cultural changes that we did, and culture was absolutely important because if you wanted to be a new age investment firm, it all started with the people being in the right environment to contribute, right? Because I was making way too many decisions, making too many, I would say, trivial decisions. I was approving claims for staff going overseas. I was approving travel requests for an analyst going overseas, and all that, it should all be delegated. I was even choosing the color of the tiles at another 118, which I shouldn't really be doing because my color coordination is not very good. So
right, we hear all about your radical and culture changes. It ripples through the industry. Whatever BNB does, everyone hears it in the next few days. It's widely known, it's very widely talked about on Twitter and whatnot. And you were talking about the little things like picking tiles, picking all these little items, and it's happening. So it's what I do as well. And I'll go up to the management and say, okay, so what do you like? Which color do you prefer? Which items do you prefer? A lot of these things can be, the authority can be given to those of lower levels,
delegation,
right? Yeah. All right. Okay. So before we move on, I think just now we had someone who raised up his hand. Daniel, are you still there? Do you have a question for us? Okay, it's okay. He might not be there. Okay, Daniel, if you ever have any questions, you can Daniel? Okay, it's not there. Okay, it's okay. Okay, let's open to the floor. Would you like to ask your question straight to Jalil? Feel free to do so. Do you have anyone?
Hi, Afrina, Daniel
Hi,
here.
yes, hi, Daniel.
Hi. Sorry, I was.
Daniel, your mic just got muted.
Hello. Hi.
Yeah.
Can you hear me? Okay. Hi, Jalil. Just a question on, I think your experience of working in Singapore and then sort of coming back to Malaysia. Just trying to understand, or also the words of wisdom that you can impart on us in terms of the leadership in the Malaysian context, especially with regard to the nuance that's associated with it. Yeah. Thank you.
I think what Malaysia lacks, right, is from my observation, even before I joined PNB, because I was a fund manager at one of the many countries that fell under emerging markets was Malaysia. So, I did spend some time, looking at my team as well, looking at companies in Malaysia. And because we were long-term investors, we always looked at companies in a much more holistic form. And a lot of that would start by looking at board of directors, governance structure, management, how are they incentivized and everything. It is, I would say it's a managed style that has not really kept up with times, right? And whether that is down to, whether it's a uniquely Malaysian problem, or it's because a lot of the large companies are dominated by state. So I think there is different. If you look at Malaysia, okay, take out the SMEs, right? The large companies, essentially you've got a lot of government-owned companies. Then you have the tycoons owning the companies. So in the government-linked companies, you've got a very top-down kind of management model, which I spoke about just now, right? Essentially, government is still parenting companies, and I disagree with that notion, right? I think if government owns the company, there should be a reason why they own it, but let professional board and management run it. But there's still like government giving instructions, and then it goes down. So it's just the ultimate parenting is still being done at the top. And that leads to the way people are appointed, the way people behave, and the way people make decisions. Then you've got the companies owned by tycoons. And they're still very much larger than life kind of scenario, where the owners of the company wake up and decide, okay, I want to sell this, I want to go into property development. And it happens. Everyone will fall in line, right? So I think the thing is that we have not gone through an institutionalization of management, both at the state and also at the corporate level yet. If we look at our neighbors, if you take Thailand and Indonesia, there are more and more family-owned companies that are institutionalized. So the owners of the company are just realizing, okay, business is getting complex, world has changed. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move up and become chairman of the holding company. But the company is going to be run by professionals. Philippines did this very early on and has had great success in doing it. Followed by Thailand and increasingly Indonesia. Malaysia, not so. So I think that is the phase that we need to get to. That we're still very much a very top-down kind of thing, but it's also a lot down to culture as well, and that's what needs to be changed, and that's what I battled very hard to change as well, from a very small position.
All right, thanks Daniel for your question. Right, for everyone else, I do see your questions in the chat box, so we'll address them as we go forward, right? If you would like to ask questions directly, you may just raise your hand, right? Okay. All right, Jalil, let's move on to personal development. Have you yourself ever felt like you were never good enough, especially in your younger days, when you just started off?
Yeah, I know. It's I think everyone has to normalize this feeling. I get this question so much, and I think everyone needs to understand that the road to kind of, I guess, becoming CEO or success, no matter how people define it, isn't really dependent on what books you read, how early you wake up and everything, right? You got all these like 6 signs of what successful CEOs do. I was like, okay, great, but everyone is different, right? Everyone is different. Everyone's wired differently. I'm not a very early morning person, right? I do get up early because I have kids who get up way earlier than me. But do I necessarily enjoy it? No. And I wasn't always in school a person who was always hitting the top grades, right? I found school quite boring from my point of view. I love the social aspect of the school. I didn't necessarily enjoy the educational aspect because I was curious about a lot of things that I could not find answers to. And of course, if today I went into school, I'll do very well because now it all makes sense why. But I didn't have the answers back then. So yes, do you question yourself? Yes, you do question yourself all the time. It's perfectly normal, but I think the key is for you to surround yourself with good people, be humble enough to ask whenever you don't know something, and keep on improving. And every time you make mistakes, again, this needs to be normalized. Always have a self-reflecting exercise about what could be better, and why you made that certain decisions, and how can you avoid it. The post-mortem thing is extremely very important. When I was CEO and we had to pitch for client money, before I joined PNB, every time we lost a pitch, we would do a post-mortem exercise. It was not a blame game or anything, but really to understand, where did we go wrong? Was the pitch wrong? Did we put the wrong people in front of the client, right? Did we not hit the objective that they asked for and everything? But it was an exercise that can be quite defeating for you, because you spend a lot of time on it, and then you felt that, we're not good and everything. But I think it's a very positive thing. So I would say, is it normal? Yes. But the key is to kind of think about how to make yourself better, what went wrong, how can you improve, surround yourself with good people, and always ask questions, be humble.
Yeah, that's very true. It's all about reflection and
Yeah.
seeing where we can improve. All right, so the younger generation, some of us, we feel that we do very well, like exceptionally well, or we put a lot of effort, but then we see those who don't try as hard, and they climb up the ladder fast, or in other ways, keep us to go the way out. So what's your take? What do you think, like, how would, those who feel underappreciated, how do we overcome this? Because we see it all the time. It's normal, with all the politics and what's going on. And at the end of the day, it goes back to the culture itself, right?
Yeah. So there's this in a way, this bodate culture, right? It's not just something that happens here. It happens everywhere. It happens in the US, it happens in the UK, everywhere. I've seen it happen in every country. It's just human nature. Humans are social animals that are wired to impress, right? Especially when the success, the end game towards impressing means that you can get a promotion, more money, bigger role, and everything. Of course, people do it, but I think if most of these people move up, it's also a question of poor leadership along the way, right? The inability to kind of see what is form, what is substance, right? It's also a function of poor leadership. When you don't have a secure leader in place, an insecure leader, the insecure leader tends to always look in the rearview mirror, thinking who's coming after, right? And there is a tendency for you to surround yourself with people who say yes, not question you and everything, which is why every company needs to have a very firm, secure leader. Someone who knows exactly what they're doing, very firm, and doesn't really necessarily need to surround themselves with poor quality people. What can you do? I think you need to stand out, right? And I always say the way to stand out is for you to gain as much knowledge as possible. You may not necessarily be with the firm for 10, 20 years, but whilst you're there, learn as much as you can. And the biggest way you can learn is talking to people, right? Talking to your colleagues, that's free. And you can do it on a daily basis. And the amount of knowledge that you will learn is massive, right? And you either use that knowledge within the firm or you go on beyond that. So at least when you move on from a firm, you are equipped with a lot of knowledge, not just from the work that you do, but from having gained a lot of stuff around that. So and that's how you stand out, right? If you're applying for, say, a technical role, if you are able to have a commercial mind, that is a very, very powerful combination, right? So if you're an engineer who knows about sales, about how products are done, how distribution is done, that is a super powerful combination, right? And you can do that by speaking to a lot of your colleagues and knowing that. So that's how you stand out, whether it's in your firm or at your next job interview.
Right. And Jalil, you mentioned about, learning and always, being agile, especially, being young and whatnot. So, I think a lot of people are interested to know, people say, the early 20s, especially when you start your career, you're supposed to be very aggressive, learn as much as you can. And sometimes this entails, jumping from company to company. And we can see even in, the very few years that you work, you jump from one place to another. What is your thing? How many years, would you say a person, it's time to move somewhere else? The amount of years perhaps that person has acquired substantial knowledge from the organization, and it's time to move.
I don't think there's a fixed period, right? And also companies have changed a lot. So for example, if you have graduated and you work in a startup, right? And the startup remains quite small and you leave after 1 year, it's not necessarily a bad thing, right? Because you go on to your next job interview and you tell, okay, I may have been there for 1 year or less than 1 year, but I've learned this much. I've done fundraising, I've done operations, I've done sales, I've done this. And that's super. That's probably what somebody else in another job would have taken 4 years to do, right? So there's nothing wrong about that. But if you're just moving because you're unsure in your mind, what is it that you want, even after 10 years of working, that's a problem. And then if you also are moving just because a small monetary increase in salary without having gained any sort of substantially value adding skills from each job is also a problem, right? So I don't think there's a fixed time period. I would look at it from what they have learned. Somebody may have stayed on with a firm for 3-4 years, but have learned a lot. Someone may have learned that same amount of knowledge in less than a year. Then there are people who have stayed with firms for a very long time, right? Again, I would say what they have done. If you have done the same thing for 20 years, maybe not so great, right? But if you stayed with the same firm and you've taken up 10 different roles over, say, 30 years in the firm, right? You've run a business in India or China or something like that. That's a massive amount of value add that you're bringing into the firm. So I would look at it from that point of view, and that's how I've always approached hires and interviews. Always to talk about what have you learned from this job, and that's why I always say that when you write your resume, don't write the description of your role or this is what I did, right? No. I would say 9 out of 10 people are not interested in that. But what would make you stand apart is to write what you have achieved in each role, and what have you learned. So that would be much more powerful. And when you approach it from that point of view, the conversation would be very, very different.
All right, that's very true, Jalil. The amount of years you spend in a company does not equate to the, the knowledge and the skills that you've obtained from that. Yeah. All right. So there's a question here, asking about, what qualities do you search for in an employee? And perhaps we can pair that with, certain skills and knowledge to give oneself the extra edge, especially in the current time.
So I would say one is curiosity, right? I always love people who are curious, and I think in the line of work that I did, which is investments, we needed curious people. We needed people to question why things were that way, because the worst quality for somebody to come in as a fund manager is just to take whatever that they read, right? That's not why you're there. You're there to kind of question, look underneath, be critical, be the devil's advocate. So curiosity was the first one. Second is the drive and ambition, right? We love that about people coming in and saying that, I would like to do this. They may not necessarily achieve that, but it's good. It's good to have a drive and ambition, a goal, a bit of that hunger to come in. And we've also met a fair share of people who don't come with their hunger, right? They're just like, yeah, I'll see how this goes, and even if you feel that way, you shouldn't portray that in an interview, right? You should still show that there is some drive for you to move on. Third is just being aware of your surroundings, right? When I say being aware of your surroundings is general knowledge, knowing really what's happening, how the world is a bit linked in a certain way, just being able to have a robust conversation is quite important. And the fourth one is, I guess, personal beliefs or I would say integrity or social, right? Yeah. What is it that you want to achieve in life, right? Outside of work, right? Are you trying to make the education system better in this country, or are you trying to improve something? What motivates you, what drives you, right? And it can be anything, no right or wrong answer to that. But we always ask this question. It's a bit of a self-reflecting exercise for a lot of people as well, to kind of think about, when I get into a job, what is my personal belief that aligns with this job? And which is why a lot of new firms today, you see, the startup firms, as well as the more established one, now having a lot of purpose statements, right? They come out and say, why do we exist? And that was really done, driven by the very young group of people coming into the workforce today. So the most common question I get is, what is the purpose of the firm? What is this firm's ultimate goal and ambition? Which is a fantastic, phenomenal question, right? But again, I would throw that question back to them. What is your personal goal and ambition? So it'll be those things that we would look for.
All right, thanks, Jalil. All right, okay. When we talk about all of this, but there's also a question of one's passion and reality, what they're doing and all that.
Yeah.
So sometimes those who get to pursue their passion, that's amazing. That's luck on your side. For others, reality, you have to pay the bills and whatnot. So you
Absolutely.
work in a job that may not be something you're passionate about. So how do we find purpose? Especially a job that is very requires a lot of commitment and whatnot. So the balance between passion and reality.
I think the purpose and passion need not be tied with the job that you do, right? For example, this whole football club that you have now is driven by a passion and purpose, right? Clearly, you love football. You want to have a social objective, but you have a day job, which is completely different to what it is. So I always say it need not be the same thing. It's good to have something at the back of your mind. It's that goal that you want to work towards, whether it's full-time as a career, or whether it's part-time, or whether I just spend a few hours a month trying to achieve that objective. Perfectly fine. But it need not be aligned. And you're right, very few people get to do what they absolutely love. But that shouldn't stop you from not having it at all.
All right, thanks, Jalil. All right, let's move on to the last segment before we proceed to Q&A. It's on personal branding and comms. So, especially in the youth and whatnot, we are so exposed to the social media now. There's so many, platforms and outlets for us to brand ourselves. You are heavily active across platforms. I see you sometimes on Clubhouse, and then you're on Twitter, like sometimes simultaneously as well. So what's your take about the youth projecting a certain image, especially for personal branding? A lot of youth usually use it just mainly for social rather than personal branding for career and whatnot.
Yeah. No, I think beyond the youth, I think everybody should embrace it, right? I don't think social media is a us versus them topic. Everyone should embrace it, and I definitely embraced it from both a personal and corporate perspective. And again, this is where I think the start of culture changes. As you know, social media has changed so many things. It's for good and for worse, I have to admit. It has democratized a lot of things, access to information. So there is a duty for, I guess, individuals, influential individuals, and also corporations to kind of use that social media influence in a positive way to exert positive changes, right? Again, I use PNB as an example where we operated in this classic black box situation, right? So we're in this black box and no one can see us, we cannot see others, right? And we operated in this veil of secrecy. Veil of secrecy for a fund that has half the population of Malaysia as its unit holders is very dangerous, because inevitably you get asked questions about why you do certain things. And when you don't answer, in this day and age, okay, maybe 20 years ago, it's okay if you choose not to answer, right? Because no other ways to get information. But today, if you don't answer, someone makes it up for you. Anyone can write anything, right, on the WhatsApp and then starts forwarding it around and writing blogs and everything. So I've always seen social media or our corporate comms as a means to kind of set the narrative rather than chasing the narrative, right? Essentially being proactive rather than being reactive, which is why we use all forms of social media to educate people on how PNB operated, what we did, why we did certain things, what was the thought process of announcing certain things. We articulated about what we were doing from a culture refresh, people refresh, and everything. And people enjoyed that, and I think it was very important to kind of show behind the scenes what happened. We had a lot of other plans that we wanted to do over time, of course. But I think that is a very powerful tool for corporates to use from a corporate comms perspective. And then from an individual perspective, the leaders of corporations should also use that as a way to kind of influence positive change, right? Whether it's policies, whether its behavior, its integrity, set the standards, right? And use that as a tool to engage people, and I feel that if you are talking about a generation gap, social media is actually a very good tool to bridge that. To bridge that, I met so many people who say, "Oh, I'm not a social media person," and everything. I said, "Well, no one is asking you to be super active on it, but just embrace it, right? Don't shut it out, but embrace it." But that's how it's going to be today, right? That's how you measure engagements. That's how the world is going to be, fortunately or not. So, the quality of a new leader coming into corporations today is how they manage communications, right? And how they manage a crisis that can come out from that. And if you're not well versed in media and technology, you won't be a good leader in the coming era.
All right, thanks, Jalil. On the note of personal branding, what would you believe in of areas of branding that's often overlooked? Sometimes when we apply for jobs, there's like thousands of applicants. Even for myself, I was at the London Career Fair. There were like 30,000 people, and there were only 50 employers. Each company, wants to hire about 15 or 20 max. So how do these individuals, how do you stand out, especially, you were mentioning about the resume, to talk about, to highlight what you learn and whatnot. But in terms of like self-branding, the personality, all these little things that people overlook, but, make them stand out.
Yeah, so I think fresh grads need to understand that when they get into the workforce, they don't necessarily offer 10 years of technical experience, right? Essentially, you're being hired to be paid to learn, essentially, right? But then, so you have to think from that perspective about how do I make myself attractive? I don't have 10 years of experience to give. But what do you have? What makes you interesting? Again, it's a ask yourself question situation. What makes yourself interesting? If you've done odd jobs, you should list that down. You should actually have a think about what have you learned from that, right? We interviewed some people who did odd jobs, serving, being waiters and doing all that. But they were able to articulate what they learned from that, right? How to handle with difficult people, customers, how to handle with schedules, being organized and everything, right? So you have two people who did the same work, right? Who were both waiting tables during holidays. One said, I was waiting tables. That's it. Another one, actually articulated what they have learned from that and what skills are they bringing: organization, discipline, handling people, working in tight deadline, working under pressure and everything. And that's how you stand out, right? And then your personal interest. Have you done anything out of personal interest? Were you volunteering to do something? Were you fundraising for something? A lot of people overlook those aspects, and they just say, "Alah, tak, it's not that important," and everything. So it's very, before, when you start looking for a job, it's important to kind of just take a step back, reflect. What are you most comfortable doing? What have you been very good at? What would make you different from your other people, right? And that's what you should be reflecting. And if you don't have any, it's time. If you can't think of anything that stands out, that is a starting point for you to start improving yourself in certain places. So and I still do the exercise until today, right? To think, where are my gaps, where could I have done better? Where did we lose sight of certain things and everything? And I think this is a useful thing for people to do over the period of their career.
All right, Jalil, that is if we are talking about if you get opportunity, through the door for an interview. What if, if we are, surrounded with competition, especially like when you go for career fairs and whatnot, you only have about 5 to 10 minutes when you walk around. How do you, impress the recruiters and whatnot in just that 5-10 minutes to convince them, to give you the opportunity to go for the interview itself? Sometimes they call you, it's just a few minutes and there's this perception that they form about you.
So two things, right? Drive and personality. If you had 5 minutes, we call that the elevator pitch, right? You're stuck in an elevator on the way up. You got like 2-3 minutes to make an impression on somebody. What would you tell? And yeah, you can't list down a list of accolades that you have done, but it's always that passion and it's always that personality, right? You're an interesting person, and I think, I always say sense of humor will always work. People always love that. But it's always drive and personality. I think you just need to be in a situation like that. In order to stand out, you need to be social and you need to think about the softer skills, right? It's super important, right? We talk a lot about academics in school, but something that we don't work enough on in school is the softer skills.
Yeah, talking about soft skills, and some people don't like the term soft skills, right? People tend to opt for like interpersonal skills and whatnot. We see a lot of these like young talent programs. We see management trainees, whatnot, and even when you're in, they focus a lot on the knowledge that you need for the job.
Yeah.
But they don't really focus on this interpersonal skills that you said, like when it was your turn, you were following those people in the leadership roles. You were actually there, see how it works. But that's not really how it works for all of these programs. And even in school, we focus a lot of knowledge acquiring and whatnot. Skills are in theory rather in practical.
So I think it's difficult to teach a 22 or 23-year-old how to interact with other people. I think a bit, I wouldn't say too late, but it's a bit difficult, right? And I think this is something that should be kind of taught in school. But a lot of this is just natural instinct, which is driven by curiosity. So when you're curious and you're passionate and you're driven, you will ask, you will interact with people, right? It's just that mind of yours that pushes you, like an inertia, pushing you towards that direction. Then there are people who are a bit more introvert, right? Fine. They may not necessarily excel in that sort of roles, but they have other skill sets and they might be very good. And I know a lot of people who are quite happy just being behind a desk 9 to 5. Nothing wrong with that, right? I also had a lot of fund analysts who said their ultimate dream was to be a fund manager. Failure rate 90%, right? Not every good analyst becomes a fund manager. Because the reality is different. As an analyst, you just analyze companies, you give your recommendation, right? But as a fund manager, you're putting it to work and then you're accountable for performance. Then you have to think about, how do I have 100 ideas and put it into one portfolio? And how do I make this work? If one goes wrong, how does it affect the other? So there's a lot of different skill set coming through, right? So just because somebody is good at something doesn't necessarily mean they will thrive at it, right? Because at different points in your career, things will happen. And these things you can't teach. People just need to have that sort of common sense and instinct to kind of navigate it.
All right, thanks, Jalil. All right, let's take a look at some of the questions here. Okay, some have been answered. Okay, so one of the questions is for you, directly, specifically. When you started your career, did you plan your career to end up as a CEO? Like some people, since they're very young, I want to become a CEO. Was that the case for you?
Yeah, I think growing up, I love to read books on successful people, right? So my area of interest in reading was always I read countless amounts of biography, history. I've always loved looking at how history has played a part in decisions, and it still rings true, right? History defines culture, culture defines behavior, behavior drives decisions, right? So I've always been very, very, from a young age, always reading that sort of thing, and then looking at the people aspect. And I guess when I first went into fund management, I didn't have that idea in me. But then I met a lot. My job involved me meeting a lot of CEOs, right? We met a lot of CEOs of companies to analyze whether the company was worth investing in. And then I got involved in the running of the business, the asset management business itself. And that's when I thought, maybe I would do a decent job in this. And I was quite fortunate. I got an opportunity early on. So I didn't grow up thinking about it. It kind of happened. But when it did happen, I did have somewhat sufficient knowledge, because I had spent several years speaking to all these CEOs, and they would tell about what has made them successful or not, what decisions did they make, what did they regret, and everything. So I think for me, that was the greatest learning knowledge. And until today, I meet a lot of people, and I still continue networking and meeting a lot of people, and that's what educates me. So no, I never planned. It happened. But I think the key is trying to kind of stay there and make yourself better.
All right, thanks, Jalil. All right, to the floor. If you have any questions you would like to ask Jalil, you can actually just unmute and ask straight away. But in the meantime, okay, the next question is, what are the core principles that you keep dear to yourself? Oh, hi, who's that?
Hilmi here.
Okay, all right, go ahead, Hilmi.
Hi, thank you, Afrina. Hi, Jalil, how are you?
Good, Hilmi.
Well, thank you very much for the knowledge sharing. It's very fantastic to learn from your point of view, and basically learning from you myself. Well, you are now one of my idol, other than Elon Musk, in corporate government, in corporate world. I'm actually amazed on how young you can climb the corporate ladder. Well, I'm actually want to ask for any tips, but you have shared so many tips just now. Me myself has been implementing this OKR, objective and key results, in how I complete my task. But then just want to have more clarity on learning. Any tips on how to success like UR and any other good material that I can refer to?
Firstly, thanks for the kind words. I've always said that I think on-the-job learning is probably the most important thing. And I think as you kind of take on a bit more leadership roles, is to be very, very clear in objectives, right? Like if you're going into the job, what are your key priorities? Always make that very, very clear and be razor sharp in it, right? And I think often people go into roles and they lose sight of the key objectives, and that's when they kind of go off tangent. They start doing a lot of things, and then you come to a situation where you kind of like doing 10 and finishing at 50% and not really hitting 100 in 3. So I always say that, if you have 3 things to achieve, you focus and achieve that. Whatever you achieve after that, it's a bonus, right? so be very razor sharp about it. And always kind of, I always say, surround yourself with good people, right? You may never know, because as you go up again, and as you progress in your career, your next job is likely to come from a word of mouth or an endorsement from somebody else rather than an ad in the paper. So that kind of ability to kind of make yourself noticeable, to be able to network, to know what's happening around. Like I'm obsessed about competitors and what they're doing, not because I want to do what they want to do, but I'm really curious about what they do, right? So even when I joined PNB, I still knew all the other fund management firms were doing, what products they were launching and everything. I was super curious about it, and I was curious about who was moving into which roles. Borderline obsession stalking people. But I was very curious to know about the movement of people. That always gave me an edge, I guess, because I always knew I could visualize what they were planning to do. Because if you are in the industry, you're in the network, you know the people, you know what sort of behaviors they are and what sort of changes they bring to firms. So we could be always, I guess, ahead in terms of that. So that's what I did, So I enjoyed networking, and that's what I did. And in terms of knowledge, I don't know what line of work you do, but always update yourself, right? And that's what's going to keep you ahead of the rest. I give an example. When we were in Singapore, we had a returnee women's program. This was specifically launched at women who wanted to rejoin the workforce after several years out, typically to have a family. And a lot of them who were successful, in fact, 3 of my senior management members were returnee females. The edge that they had over others was that although they were out for 3, 5, 7 years, they always kept in touch with what was happening in the industry, who was doing what and what was happening. And that is where they kind of bridged that kind of gap, and they were able to say, I know what's happening, and they got back in. So that would be my advice. It sounds a bit all over the place and generic, but I think it all boils down to, I guess, you being sharp as a leader, having that knowledge and knowing what happens around you.
Thank you very much, Jalil. For my next question, can you share what are the other materials that you normally refer to have this kind of decision-making skills?
So I read a lot of the papers, a lot of the publications, right? I'm a big believer in good journalism. So I'm one of those who actually pays newspaper companies still. So I read a lot. So I spend probably my first hour of the day reading various articles, newspapers, and making sure I'm updated, whether it's just news or thought pieces or opinions. I read a lot of books on, like I said, on history, on biographies and everything. So it's a lot of reading. I think in as a fund manager, I spend about 80% of my time reading, right? I was reading company annual reports to the research reports my team was writing, and all these reports and journals that were written, right? So it's a lot of reading. So it's a combination. It's evolved over the years, I would think. I don't read finance books. That's what you're alluding to. I just found it quite dry and not terribly helpful. I don't read management books as well, but I like reading books on people and their lives, because it's, I think, a lot more reflective about, more realistic about challenges that they face on a daily basis.
Thank you. Perfect. Thank you very much, Jalil. Fantastic.
All right, thanks, Ilmi.
Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Is
Hello,
it Kamarul?
Jalil. Yeah, hi Jalil. Kamarul here. So
Yeah.
first of all, before I proceed to my question, I would like to thank FC SWAT Izzat, Afrina, and yourself. A very informative session, I would say. I've been following since the beginning. So I think at this kind of new era, new normal, right? So we have seen a lot of new young leaders emerge in the structure, corporate structure, right? So my question is that, as part of the new leaders, the younger generation take part on the higher level, there's always things for them to learn. And when you go, when you report to people who are very senior, they give you directions, but they don't really tell you how to do it, you see? So I believe at your position, when you become the CEO of PNB, and there's a certain things that you may not know. What are the steps that you take in order for you to actually cover the things that for you to master it, one thing, and how do you manage the aspiration of the board members?
Yeah, so it's this is experience, right? You just deal with different characters and everything. I had a very interesting board that made 7 people with 7 different kind of personalities, right? Quiet, some needed tender loving care, some got things very quickly. So I managed all of them differently, right? Some needed to be told about. So before board meetings, I would always brief the board members individually about what was being going to be tabled, so that board meetings don't go on for like 6-7 hours. But essentially, the same information had to be dissected in 7 different ways, because I was dealing with 7 different kind of individuals, right? So that was one. Coming into PNB, I was fairly lucky because I'm an investment person, so I understood what they were doing, but of course not 100%. I always say in my job, my first month I would spend listening rather than doing, because it's important to listen to what was happening. I came into the job with an idea of what I wanted to do and what was wrong with PNB, but I needed to listen to make sure that my thoughts were in sync with what was being told to me. So only after the first decision I made decisions. After the first month, I made decisions. But I consulted in a lot of people, right? Whether it was internal, whether it was external, I always surrounded, and I asked them, what do you think we should do? Of course, ultimately the buck stops with me. I make the decision, but it was always never a decision made in isolation by myself. I always took feedback. Like I said, I think we still have some way to go before people have a much more robust feedback loop discussion with the bosses, because it's still a bit takut to upset the boss and everything. And I was fine. I was fine for people to say my idea sucked, right? I actually would appreciate that. And then of course you got the ultimate stakeholders, which is the government, right? And I think there you kind of manage it delicately, right? Ultimately at the end of the day, they are politicians and they want to look good in front of the electorate. I get that, right? So I think there's always a way to kind of balance that, to make sure that you're not sacrificing integrity, but also at the same time you are achieving national objectives that they can then go on and tell their people that they have done. So I would say it's a lot of human emotion and assessment to deal with that, right? Knowing how to deal with it. Essentially, it's the same information. You're dissecting it in different ways. Knowing when to talk and not to talk is quite an art, because sometimes you don't want to overtell and putting yourself in a corner, and sometimes you don't want to not tell at all, making you look like you're hiding something. So again, that's a decision you need to make, right? So I think those were perhaps the most stressful moments for me, because you had multiple stakeholders, you had different ways to manage, what do you say, what you don't say, whom do you upset, whom you don't upset, and inevitably you will upset people, right? But it's just a question of, do you want to upset 10 today, or do you say, okay, 1 is enough, I will upset the other 10 6 months from now, right? So we had a priority list even, right? People that we wanted to replace or remove in certain companies, and we told them, okay, we're not renewing your contract. But we had a pecking order in my mind. One was people who needed to go immediately because they were very toxic. They were the cause of a lot of problems. Then there was another group. We said, okay, you're almost like few months or 1 year away from your contract or retirement. We'll wait lah. You're okay. You're not disturbing anything. Then there was another group of more structural kind of things that we needed to do, a bit more longer term. They are okay, but in 3 years' time they may not be. So then we will change. So I was very clear in how to execute those changes. But again, in order to make the right decision, you need to speak to people.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir, for your feedback. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, thanks, Kamaro, for the question. All right, Wani, I see your hand up. Okay, but let's take one of the questions here in the chat box first, and I'll get to you. So hold on to that thought. All right, okay. So the next question is by Nasir Ahmad. Okay, Jalil, what are the core values that you keep dear to yourself, not related to work, but more on a personal level?
Yeah, so I say do the right thing, right? Doing the right thing is absolutely important. I think earlier on I said that I think everybody who must have a personal core value, whatever they believe in. I think you need to do good, right? For me as a CEO, it's an amazing opportunity to make people's lives better in whatever ways, right? Within the first month, increasing people's salary, that was a huge thing for a lot of people, right? Suddenly they found themselves with more than 1,000 ringgit more in their pocket every month, right? And it was when I had that feedback session with the staff, it was pretty emotional, right? A lot of them, they never had pay rises for like maybe 20 years, suddenly getting that. But it's I guess those sort of things that I want to do, make people's lives better. When I took on the PNB job, I had only one thing in my mind. I wanted to make corporate Malaysia better. That was my ultimate obsession. That was my objective, right? How I got there was how I get there is a different question altogether. But I just wanted to leave a better corporate Malaysia, not at the expense of integrity and principles, right? And I think, often there is a balancing act. The balancing act is maybe, okay, I want to do 10, I cannot do 10, I'll do 3 today, all right? It's okay. I may not finish everything that I wanted to do, but at least I can finish some. But it shouldn't come at the expense of principles and selling your soul to the devil and everything. Because if you start doing that, you're part of the problem, right? If you're coming to fix the problem, you must be the solution and not part of the problem. Yeah, and that's how I always believe, and that's something I'll take on to my next role. And that's the first thing I always ask every before I go on into every job, right? I always ask what is the problem and what needs to be fixed. That's my first thing that I ask. It's the first thing I ask at PNB as well. Yeah.
All right, thanks, Jalil, for the answer. Okay, so next up, okay, Wani, are you still there? Would you like to ask a question?
Yes. Hi, Jalil.
Hi, Wani.
Hi. Okay, so I really enjoyed this
Hi,
session.
cousin.
Hi. Thank you very much. So we hear during this session that you like to read, and you also said that you spend lot of time reading, and you are not an early riser. So I'm sure many participants here are very ambitious, but at the same time, especially during this season of working from home, they feel like they're overwhelmed with work and working like 20 or of the 24 hours. So my question would be, how do you manage your time? And since you were a CEO since 2010, I also wonder, do you work like 20 hours a day? Yeah.
No, it's a good question. I'll take the last question first. Do I work 20 hours a day? No, I love my spare time, right? I wish I had more. I would say it was, hours were quite long at PNB. And hours were long because there was a lot of things to do. Again, because of the decision-making pyramid, everything flowed back up to me. So I was making every decision, right?
it could have been better. And a lot of the changes I was putting in place was meant so that I delegate and decentralize, So the idea would be that, if I had been there, probably now I would have a bit more free time, right? I think in all my jobs, it was always continuous. I'll always get home, I'll check emails and everything, but I don't necessarily work. But in this day and age, you're connected. So, to say that you're always constantly working is probably correct, but not at the expense of family time and everything. How do I manage my time? There's always blocks, right? So I've had, like every, I think, good CEO, you're always blessed with a wonderful personal assistant, right? And I've had amazing PAs who know how to manage my time. So at PNB, I would typically get in about 7:30 after sending the kids to school, and so between 7:30 to 8:30, it's I actually do not schedule any meetings. There is free time for any of the staff to come in, and I made that very clear to all the people that I will be approachable. That you don't need to make an appointment to come and see me. You don't need to pass through multiple layers to come and see me. If you want a quick decision on something, don't wait until your monthly meeting or anything. You can come in, tell me quickly, yes or no, we'll make a decision, and then you can move on. So I always kept that as an open time. And then there were blocks of meetings which we will stagger throughout the week or throughout the month on certain fixed dates. And then my lunchtime were typically networking lunches. That is where I would have appointments where I would meet the CEOs or chairmen of our investee companies, and all those stakeholder, the stuff that needed a bit more delicate, softer human interaction rather than them coming to an office, sitting in a boardroom across me, right? So and I shortened meetings as well. Like I said, most of the courtesy calls when they came in, I said 30 minutes. That's it, right? Tell me exactly what you want. I'll say yes or no. So we kept blocks shorter. And I tried to avoid dinner meetings after work, but if I had to, that will also be more networking related, something like lunch, right? So that's how I broke it. When I was chairman of Sapura, I would typically spend my later evenings of Friday there. So between 3 to 6, I was typically in the Sapura office. And that's when I would have meetings with the senior management and the chairmen of the board committees and everything. So that's how we worked around the schedule. There's always a block for everything. And even since leaving PNB, I still have that block, right? So morning is my fitness block, my personal training or tennis or anything. And then after that, I start most of my work. And then my lunchtime is my social time. And then I start again. Yeah. So I still keep the same routine in probably a less tense way, but there's still a routine.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
All right, thanks, Wani, for the question. All right, we have a question here from Shahir Ali. Hi, Jalil. After an impressive position of being Group CEO, what's next and why?
What's next and why? I don't have a definitive answer for that. I have something in my mind. I have various things in my mind that has come through. But I think one thing clear is I don't want to do anything government related. I think we're a bit far from that happening. And I've kept my options open. It does look like I may move back abroad. That is a possibility. And what am I've not really had in my mind what exactly I want to do. It could be in asset management. It could be outside. There are some interesting discussions ongoing. And we should have some clarity over the next few months. Does it have to be a group CEO role? Not necessarily. It'll be nice if it is, but I've always been quite open with that, right? Because I think if you pigeonhole yourself and say, I only want to work in large firm as group CEO, you may make the wrong decision. And also you may pigeonhole yourself and close out other more interesting opportunities. And so for me, I think There needs to be a good culture fit. There needs to be empowerment. I do best in roles where I'm told what needs to be achieved and left alone to do it with empowerment. So I think that is probably what I would have at the back of my mind now when I talk about future roles. It could be here, it could be abroad.
All right, thanks, Adil, for the answer to the question. Moving on to another question. What's your thoughts on feudalism in Malaysia?
It's a problem, right? You know, it's a bit too ingrained in our society, right? You know, from it can be everything from titles, how we treat people, how we behave, our hierarchy, ingrained culture. You know, I don't like it because I think feudalism leads to a lot of other things. It leads to also people just blindly obeying orders and not having, you know, a sense of kind of standing up and telling what's right, what's wrong, and everything, right? I think world has changed, right? You know, I don't like it, right? You know, it was something I had to get used to in the first few months of coming again, because a lot of the cultures were ingrained. One thing I told my comms person was that every function I'm attending, no red carpet and no big feudal chairs, you know, the big chairs that people sit in functions, yang besar tu, yang ada, that looks bigger.
Kawang-kawang tu.
Ada kawang tu that looks bigger than all the other things. I said, no, none of that, no holding room, nothing, right? Tell me what time to attend, I will attend. We'll go in straight and make it casual. So I think you can, I think this is the great thing. I think if young leaders who are driven by the right values and principles come into jobs, you have an amazing opportunity to rewrite how things are done. But of course, if you are coming into the job and you're young and you actually like all that, then okay, you're also part of the problem, right? But I think if you can come in and make those changes, that's the only way we can move away from those sort of things, right? And a lot of people say, you know, it's respect, and I said, no, you know, I think there's a lot of ways you can respect people without having to do all that sort of, you know, feudal stuff. But I think it is a bit of a problem in Malaysia, I would say. Yeah.
All right, Jalil, thanks. All right, so there's another question from Jeremy. In your 9 months in PNB, what was the most unpopular? You know, of course, there were a lot of decisions, you know, against the status quo and whatnot, but what was the one most unpopular decision, you would say?
Yeah, that led to my resignation. That was the most unpopular decision, right? You know, it's just by you know, writing letters to the Prime Minister and saying I disagree with what he wanted to do, right? You know, I was on record disagreeing on you know, I had huge reservations about politicians being on board, you know, for many reasons. I think first, they were not driven by the right motivation for being there, and I put my foot down. I said, no, that's not happening. I'm not revoking any contracts that I cancel for non-performance, not doing it. So I made a lot of unpopular decisions, right? And it was based on principles, based on integrity. At the end of the day, the shareholder is entitled to what they want to do. But you know, I didn't want to be part of it. So that was probably the most unpopular one, right? I think if you make a decision and you have to resign from it, that has to be top of the list in unpopularity. Yeah.
Yeah. At the end of the day, it all goes back to integrity, especially, you know, for someone you're very grounded by values and principles.
Yeah.
Right. Do we have any more questions? Would anyone from the floor like to ask about anything? See. All right.
I
Okay.
think just to let everyone know as well that we actually booked Jalil until 10:30. I know we blasted the poster until 10, but basically we booked him for 10:30.
No worries.
We have a few more minutes. I saw Ashri.
Yeah, Ashri, go ahead.
Hello there.
Ashri, okay. Hi.
Hello there, Mr. Jalil. My name is Ashri. I'm a first-year student, currently studying business and finance. So my question for you is that what was the one thing you wish you knew at at my age right now? I'm doing my degree. I want to know that one thing you wish you knew to get where you are right now.
That whatever that you study, it would probably be like what, less than 10% of that would be useful when you join the workforce. Yeah, you're in for a shock. Yeah,
Yeah.
I spent so much of time trying to understand that. And when I went to the workforce, I think the only thing I found very useful was knowing how to read a financial statement. Even then, I had to build a financial model, and it was just like, what is this? How the heck do I do this? And that's why I had a lot of very helpful colleagues and everything. But I think that's the reality, and it's not just finance or anything. But I think the way the world has moved, especially now, so rapidly, no educational institution has managed to keep up in terms of preparing students, right? So again, I get a lot of questions about what people should do to prepare very well, and I say you can't, right? You cannot be 100% prepared because there's always be gaps somewhere along the way, right? But yeah, so it's I would say yes, less than probably 10% of what you study would be relevant. And also the importance of relationship, right? And I say relationship is relationships that you make either at school, or at universities or everything. It's very important. It'll go a long way for you.
Right. Thank you so much.
Right, thanks, Ashley, for the question. Jalil, he's in his first year, and you're talking about whatever he learned is about 10%.
I'm not going to be responsible for you dropping out of university, right? So yeah.
All right. Anyway, thank you, Ashley. Thanks so much. All right. So perhaps before we end, we have Shaza, Izzat's wife.
Hi. Hi, Jalil. Thanks, Afrina. Yeah, okay. I think I'm asking more for your views with the participants, because I've heard your view before. I was in one of the clubhouse where you talked about women empowerment. And for myself, I've been blessed in a way that I have a good family support. I mean, I have been bullied before, but I made a decision to leave the company, and I heard you talked about it's very important to have people at the management to support this. So where I'm coming from is I believe in gender equality, and what I believe in that is, if you have the resources, the energy, and especially the brains to work, but sometimes some people, they may not have that privilege. Maybe you could share with the audience, if they were to face in a situation where they have to choose, and regardless that you're on the male or the female side, because along the way you would have family, or even you wouldn't, but you would have family members, who come to this point, because sometimes a woman may think that they are being, treated less, but I do believe sometimes it's just that we overlook things, and sometimes it's more like a tricky things that it is true that sometimes it's really the emotions that get to women. Because if you ask me personally, I would prefer a male boss, but one day I would and I have a team, I'm leading a team, so I do not want to be that kind of boss that was bullying me before. So yeah, if you could share that, because for the past 2 hours we heard you talked about corporate corporate things, and I think this would be something good, because some of the points that you did bring up on Clubhouse was very good for me. So just on that note, thank you so much.
It's a very pertinent question. It's obviously, without wading into who's better, the male versus female and everything, but I think both bring a different set of quality, right? And we found that there's something called an unconscious bias, right? That is formed, and all of us go through that, and we had this session with senior management in the US in my previous company in Singapore, and we asked everyone a question. These are typically quite senior leaders globally. Do you suffer from unconscious bias? Everyone said, about 90% said no, right? Then we asked them to answer a series of questions, right? Have you made decisions based on this? Based on that, it was actually 95% of them had unconscious bias, right? And so it's because you don't realize how you're making decisions. Like, for example, you may have grown up in a male-dominated family, and you may not necessarily have exposure to females so much, or you went to a boys' school and everything. There's a tendency for you to think in a certain way. Not wrong, no, nothing malicious, but you make decisions based on that, right? So this is actually quite a big human psychological cultural thing that needed to be undone, right? And we spend a lot of time with our senior leaders trying to get them to think about this. One thing we did was we paired people with a mentor-mentee program, where we actually typically would pair a male mentor with a female, and vice versa, a senior female with a male, and just so that they get a sense. These are both from a gender differentiation understanding, as well as from a generation gap understanding. So that, the idea was that, we get hiring managers to think about, things like, people sometimes need to go home early, to exercise their empathy, to not discriminate against hiring females who may get pregnant, or females who are pregnant and everything, right? How was the success of that? We traced it very closely. Pretty good. I think our hiring rate leveled up very, very nicely. I think at the senior level, we were about 49% actually female, and across regional and everything. But, not something that we'll say, oh, job done, we'll forget. There was a lot of work that goes into that. We also identified and spoke to females about what stops them from climbing the ladder. And there are a few reasons, yeah. One is, of course, in some firms, there is a natural block. People avoid you from making the step up. But there's also a confidence issue. That I have come across a lot of good female staff who said that they were not good enough for the role, and they're not going to put their hand up. And they had to be actually talked into putting their hand up for the job by male colleagues. So, and I would get that very natural in a setting where, if there was an opening for a particular role and asking who wants to do it, the male hands would go up instantaneously, right? There'll be a few ladies, but most of the time it will be the guys, right? But we knew for some roles, there were some of the ladies who were far more better qualified, right, given the kind of roles and everything, but they were like, oh, I'm not sure. So we spent a lot of time as well, coaching these ladies, having a women's network, putting them through that sort of thing. But, it was also a lot of things that are in our head that said that, and we are taught to say, don't take up things if you're not sure you can do it, right? Not just an Asian thing, but this is a global thing. You're taught certain things in school to say, if you do it properly. If you're not ready, don't make mistakes. So that's why I say, I think we need to normalize certain behavior. This is something that, working even in a global firm, I would say we were 20-30% in the journey. Then you get to a developing country, we are even further down the line, right? And a lot of this can only be achieved if we start educating people right from school. In Singapore, just to share, I was also a member of the Finance Women's Association, which is a gathering of mainly females in the financial industry. And it was mainly a group of ladies who, obviously the financial industry there was huge, so it was a pretty big grouping. But we assigned mentors and mentees, right? So typically young ladies coming into the workforce who were attached to male mentors. So I had about 2 or 3 of them every year for about 4 months. And then we also started doing work in schools where, interestingly, we brought in stereotype gender roles. So for example, to speak to students about careers, we brought in a male nurse, we brought in a female soldier. You know, these are things that, you know, instantaneously people think it's a male job, female job, right? You know, so we brought in those sort of people just to kind of make a statement, right? And teach people, you know, there was that wow effect about, oh, what made you go into that? What were your struggles? So we wanted more people to talk about that. But that started at the school level. So it's very important. This is where I think the government plays a big part. But, you know, again, I think in this case, you can't just blame them and say, well, they're not doing a good job. It's a lot of corporates need to do the job. A lot of NGOs need to come in. I was more than willing to help, and so were my fellow male CEO peers. A lot of us spend a lot of time in schools with young females and everything, doing this sort of work. So I don't know whether that answered your question, but you know, it's a lot more complex topic with not much of a definitive answer. It's definitely a journey and involves a lot of education in the process, from primary school to secondary, to not put gender, you know, to be very gender neutral in what you say and what you do, and also that when you go into the workforce, to kind of equip the people managers with the ability to ask themselves whether they are unconsciously biased in decisions that they make. And I think the world is evolving much faster than perhaps several years ago, but I think it's a journey that we're doing. Hope that answered your question.
All right, thanks, Shaza, for the questions. All right, so it's 10:40, almost 10:40 already. So Jalil, you know, thanks so much for taking the time to be with us today. Even longer than expected. We've covered so many things, you know, on leadership. We were talking about taking charge, to take initiative, and not to be all this malu-malu. You know, you have, especially as you know, you have to stand out. You have to take the initiative to be different. We talked about, you know, mentorship, and then we talk about women leadership, especially when answering Shaza's questions and whatnot. Career and employment, we talked about wages, how it's a systemic issue. Your experience, Singapore versus, you know, when you were in Singapore and Malaysia. Talked about passion versus purpose. In terms of personal development, you know, overcoming the stigma, the qualities necessary to stand out, and you know, personal branding, like our usage of social media and whatnot, and so many other things. So that's just some of the items that we gained today. So Jalil, thanks so much. Thank you for taking the time, especially on your weekend, and taking out one of your blocks.
All right, no problem. My pleasure. Thank you for inviting, and I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jalil. I think just to wrap up on behalf of the team volunteer, actually, to everyone, I think we should say thank you to Afina for moderating this session. Shaza, Hazim has been broadcasting the message. Shaza has been doing the PR work together with Indra. We are all working on a volunteer basis. We are just self-funding this, and we are glad to bring this up to everyone, and especially to have Jalil on board to share you know, his experience, wisdom, all the tips. But allow me to just, I think what I really like about what Jalil has shared is also basically the gap that I see, which is actually somehow widening. And I think that's why there's even a book about it. It's called Having a Good Why, you know, having the right why, having a purpose. I think a lot of things that Jalil shared relates back to the having a good why. You can have a good why, you can have a bad why, you can have just one reason to do things, you can have multiple reasons to do things. But if you have a bad why, try to turn it into a good why and never lose the purpose. Once you lose the purpose, then you know, things will go haywire. Jalil has been showing that, you know, it's all about focus on what's the objective, what are we trying to achieve here, and then why are we doing this. So if those any of you who joined our first session with Hizam was talking about challenging status quo. And basically Jalil has been challenging status quo from the start, but not for the sake of just challenging. It's about having a good why. Why are we doing this? Why do we have to wake up so early, for example, right? So I think I love the sharing personally myself. To all those people who spent the 2 hours with us, we hope you gain something. We hope you learn something. And let's make the world a better place. To change the world, we change ourselves first. And last but not least, the last note from us, again, do support us by following our pages, and we'll be sending you a feedback form. And in that feedback form, we actually take some measures. The reason why we start 8:30 because some people in the feedback form said 8 was a bit too early and they like to have longer sessions. So we have now 2 hours with Jalil. And so the feedback is important because we are, again, the why we are doing this, we are not doing this for ourselves, we are doing this for everyone, right? So we'll be sending you a feedback form, and you can let us know who do you want as a speaker, and if you want Jalil again, why not write his name and I can discuss it. We can make this an episode of, a series. I don't know. We never really thought that this could actually gain support. So who knows where this could lead next, right? Again, thank you everyone. Thank you so much, Jalil, and to my team as well. Terharu, very terharu. That's all I can say. All right.
All right, thanks everyone. Have a good day ahead. Have the rest of the weekend, a great one. Jalil, see you on Clubhouse and just anywhere, just basically everywhere. All right, see you on the flip side, Jalil.
Thank you. All right, bye.